A few months ago, I bought a 𝐴 Lumetric controller, which is a third-party Switch controller licensed by Nintendo that I really enjoyed using, and I shit you not even a day after I started making the video talking about how cool this controller was and how much use I got out of it, I was aiming a construct bow with Link, and this little bastard was trying to pierce the heavens. 𝐴, there's a special place in hell for you. I don't even know what I'm more upset about. The fact that there's not too many good third-party controllers out there across the board on all platforms, even if that controller is wired, or the fact that most of these original manufacturer controllers are being set at retail prices that put more of a dent in your wallet than the dents on the video game boxes that you buy from Amazon because of their terrible shipping. But look, to be fair to the side of the original manufacturers of these controllers, because any side that opposes 𝐴 is where I'm at right now, the original models of controllers for pretty much every system that ever existed has always had comparable price tags to a full game of that generation in all those respective timelines, or if not, maybe a little bit under it and close to it. I mean, hell, we've seen so many reports over the years of how game console manufacturing usually puts these companies at a loss when they produce them, so they need as many surefire ways to get a sale directly from the consumer. So, how could you blame them for trying to, advertise as many rainbow colors of the latest controller variant that you would ever want for your household? The only time blame comes into the picture is when players are trying to decide who to place it on when they walk into Target and see these ridiculous price tags for just one controller that barely does anything that they'll take advantage of. So that's something that I wanted to talk about today, and obviously I could shift all of the blame for these prices to just them packing as much features as they can into all these small tiny devices, but as simple as that answer is, and really only worthy of a damn YouTube short, I think to fully understand how we got to this point of video game controller prices, we've got to take a step back to a few generations beforehand to understand when the trend started really popping off and why it became so commonplace to see these really expensive price tags on these game controllers. So since we're all on the same page, I thought it'd be best if we started off talking about the 6th generation of consoles, since this was the generation right before we saw the most experimentation within the average video game controller. Unless you guys want to talk about the Jaguar Pro controller, because we can't get freaky. The 6th generation of consoles, which included the GameCube, PlayStation 2, and original Xbox era, this was the last generation of consoles that you could argue carried the traditional controller, in the sense that these controllers didn't have anything spectacular included with them, and they only did what they needed to do, which was play the video game. And like I said, for the time period, as respective to the new game prices for this generation that would retail for about $50, the game controller prices would be respective of that and would retail from anywhere from $30 for the GameCube controller at this time, or the PlayStation 2 that would retail for about $34, which both are more than $50 in today's spending power when you calculate inflation. So I say all that to say that the shit wasn't cheap even when you thought that it should have been for what we were getting out of those freaking wired controllers. But then we came into the 7th generation where we had the most experimentation yet with the game controller with the Nintendo Wii. I think that anyone that was around during that time to see the advertisements of that new motion-based controller were on the extreme sides of either side of that fence, either thinking that this was the coolest thing of that time period and you were just excited for the limitless opportunities of motion-based gaming, or you thought this was Nintendo's biggest waste of money yet and that it looked like it was a white stick designed for medical usage. The heart sensor didn't help either. But that white stick in question did something that no other major controller in the gaming sphere had ever even attempted to do in this, small capacity, which included having a gyroscope and even an infrared sensor for this motion-based controller to have the most accuracy when pointing this wand at your TV. And all these new cutting edge features for the time definitely reflected in the Wii Remote's price tag in 2006, which was around $39.99 or $64 in today's spending power counting inflation. And the shit that was crazy to think about was that even though it was expensive for this time period, it was still about $20 short of what the rest of the 7th generation of console controllers would charge for, which was about $59.99, or the price of a full price game during that time period, being PlayStation 3 controllers. But it was also definitely on one side of a coin that revolutionized how much you could compact into these game controllers and still get a bang for your buck. And then Arguably the other side of that coin that I feel should be there is the DualShock 3 controller, or the PlayStation 3 controller. Now, launching the same year as the Wii in 2006, on paper at least, because for most people this game console didn't come out until 2009, we could actually afford it, the DualShock 3 was another one of the first controllers to revolutionize motion controls in a mainstream light. Only this time, it was much more easy to digest, but also much more easy to ignore, since most people didn't even use the motion controls for this controller. But since they kept the same form factor of the original DualShock controllers as far as design goes, only added the new motion controls embedded within the controller itself, instead of going all out and creating something new like the Nintendo Wii Remote. And like the Wii Remote, they had their own accelerometer, a gyroscope which they called 6-axis because it's Sony. It had vibration, no infrared sensor, but this controller came with a cable to charge it within the console itself, so you didn't have to worry about having batteries. So I think it definitely played a role in how much they decided to charge for the DualShock 3, since you got some pretty substantial features for the price that you paid. But it definitely reflected against the Xbox 360 controller that retailed for $49.99. Since Microsoft knew compared to the competition, they had jack shit for the Xbox 360 controller that had no motion controls and had AA batteries required to even, use it. But since we're on the topic of 7th generation systems, like I alluded to earlier, I do believe that this was the most experimentation that we've seen from original manufacturing hardware of this time period for games, since the Wii led the charge on this whole motion control phase that we saw in other consoles, like with the PlayStation 3 having the PlayStation Move that each individual controller retail for about $50, the infamous Xbox Kinect that you just could not escape anywhere from 2011 to around 2012, which would retail for about $150 for the standalone edition, the Wii balance board for like $90, even the U-Draw tablet accounting for all 6 people that even bought that shit. The point is, with all this experimentation from the late 2000s to the early 2010s, seeing the incredibly high highs and U-Draw tablet lows of the gaming industry, all of these companies had the chance to test the waters to see what they could make outside of the traditional gaming controller and apply what they learned to the next generation, in which we definitely saw pretty much the same of in the 8th gen with the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, whatever the hell that was. Like with the DualShock 4, that controller did everything that the DualShock 3 had already brought to the table, only now with new LEDs and a new touchpad in the center of the controller that was just there. But then, of course, Nintendo, they always have their own line of business going on, in which they decide to do their own thing on their own time. And in 2012, we got the expansion of the immensely successful Wii console with the disastrous Wii U launch. Now, the disastrous launch of the Wii U horse is dead, decomposed, and recycled off to the animal ecosystem, to which there's nothing left for me to beat, so I can't even attempt to do that anymore. So I just want to talk about the gamepad itself, which Nintendo obviously wanted this to be the new revolutionary thing in gaming, like they did with the Wii Remote in 2006, because this mini monitor tablet hybrid that would accompany the TV experience of the Wii U console would reportedly cost Nintendo $79 just to manufacture. And what sucked was the fact that if you were in the market for a new gamepad for your Wii U, you could only officially buy it from Nintendo in Japan, which retailed for about $140 US. But even during the Wii U's time period, most of the control was based on the original Wii controller, which was readily available at every store by this point. So this was definitely the extreme high of the situation during this time period when it came to game controllers and their prices that we had ever seen at that point. But this new influx of price tag is definitely something that they took into account when charging for the Nintendo Switch, where we obviously see probably the most confusing and also cutting edge price tags in the modern generation. I say all that loosely because we do have the DualSense controller that retailed for $69 when it came out, but got a substantial price increase to $74 in the United States markets, which damn near makes me want to play my games using bubble wrap, because I'll be damned if I break this thing. But at the same time, it's kind of hard to argue against the price of the DualSense controller, because it's more than just a simple game controller with motion controls at this point. It's an overall gaming thing now. Like, you have all the previous motion controls now being improved. You have haptic triggers that give you resistance in some games to make it feel more realistic. The HD rumble that Sony took out of Nintendo's page to make the controller just feel even more immersive, and just the overall feel of the DualSense controller. Like I said, it feels like it is the best Sony controller they have ever put out to date. this thing is just more than a controller and an overall gaming hub that allows you to really experience the whole new era of PlayStation games, no matter how few we have of them now. So while I literally hate that price tag, I can understand it. Then we go to the Nintendo Switch, to where I can understand the insane Switch Joy-Con controller price tags as well. But believe me, it took me a couple of months in looking at this price tag to really get this, because as soon as you see that $79, it's like a knee-jerk reaction, it's like a fucking jump scare. But you're getting 2 controllers with HD rumble, IR sensors, motion controls, and they aren't just the side pieces to the Nintendo Switch monitor, and you can take them off and pass it to another player and turn it sideways, and you have a traditional controller in the sense of having those bumper buttons and just enjoying gaming that way. So when it comes down to it, for those 2 controllers, you're paying $40 a pop for each individual thing. So I get that. That is decent to me. If you were to tell me one individual controller is $40, I wouldn't look at you crazy. In this economy, for what other controllers are charging, that's decent actually. But then again, Nintendo takes anything that they have decent price and finds a way to live up to their name of being the richest Japanese company, since they have so many lawyer fees to pay for all their fruitless piracy cases. And they released alongside the Nintendo Switch, the Switch Pro controller, which was supposed to be the option for the traditional console controller users, and it retailed for $69, which that I don't understand. It has every feature of the Switch Joy-Cons, down to the motion controls, the NFC reader for amiibo figures, and even HD rumble. Only thing it doesn't have is the IR camera sensor, which barely any game will use that except for freaking 1-2 Switch or something, so that's not even a loss. I just don't understand how it couldn't have been $60 for this controller specifically, since you could compare the competition $70 controller that had so much more going on in that price range, including like having a microphone, the haptic triggers for the same price tag for the first few years of the PlayStation 5's lifespan. Yet somehow Nintendo makes the argument that the Switch Pro controller is worth that same price of a DualSense, which I never bought into that, which is why I even bought the third-party controller in the first place. But at the same time, until that aforementioned PlayStation 5 controller price increase, all the controllers stayed at that, new game price tag of $69, which got that increase in 2021. So while for the most part we are still on par to keeping game controllers the same price of new games outside of the Elite controllers and the Pro controllers of this generation and whatnot, original hardware has already started to creep up beyond the prices of new games of today's era, and I can only imagine that it's only going to get worse as time goes on, because we already have reports that the Switch 2 Joy-Cons are going to have a Hall effect on the Joy-Cons, so there's not going to be any stick drift, and it's going to be much more precision with those game controllers. And I mean, if a set of Joy-Cons are $79 at retail right now, I can only see these new Joy-Cons being around $90 or maybe even higher for the next generation. And then you also have Sony making innovations with their controllers. Only the Lord knows what that could look like in the next couple of years. But luckily with Xbox, they stick to what they know works for them. And the Series X controller is pretty much a variation of the Xbox One controller that was already a decent feeling thing. Like, I would say that the Xbox Series is the most solid and overall dependable controller build of this generation, which the controller still doesn't have any flashy features that the competition does, like motion controls or any haptic features and whatnot, but I don't really think that it needs to. I think that it keeps that original form factor that we can always depend on, even if you don't own the Xbox itself and just want this controller for maybe your PC or some other, cloud gaming thing that you will want to have, and it works fine just for that. It's so solid. But as studios try to push technology to its limit and try to push the same agenda of insane console prices each generation, the controllers are obviously going to get much more advanced and much more of a steep price tag that we already see have outpaced the, #1 golden rule of having the same prices of the games of that generation. Overall, game controller prices suck ass and are probably going to continue to do so for the foreseeable future, but there's no doubt that whatever new generation of controllers that you buy into, it's going to be the best version of that hardware that company can offer you at that given moment. So what do you guys think about the game controller prices right now, and what do you feel is the worst of that? Feel free to leave a comment down below. So like the video, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.